Salam, my name is Adey. I host a political commentary show on social media in Arabic from Jordan. It has become increasingly apparent to me that very few in the English-speaking mainstream media are using accurate framing and narrative when speaking about Palestine and Israel, while the rest use language that might misinform, misdirect, or even diminish the reality of the tragedy suffered by the Palestinian people, so that by the time it reaches the Western media, it amounts to nothing more than a passing inconvenience. Yet today, we potentially have millions of citizen reporters in the making who don't need a degree or journalistic experience to convey a story in real time. All that is needed is a smartphone, being there at the right time and the right place, and boom, you made the scoop. George Floyd is a stark example of this reality. Imagine if the people witnessing that incident did not have smartphones. Imagine if the first journalist on the scene that day was from Fox News. Oh, just imagine. But I digress. Back to our subject, the Arab world, and to be more precise, I want to talk to you today about Palestine and the ongoing situation with Israel, and the Palestinian daily ordeal living under a systematic state violence in what has been described by leading human rights organizations as an apartheid regime. But more on that on a later episode. The Palestinian Israeli conflict, as it is commonly referred to, started long before the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 over the majority of historic Palestine, as the Zionist movement has already established its roots in Palestine during the early 20th century. But that's another story for another time. Using the word conflict can be seen as contentious when referring to the situation in Palestine, as it implies some degree of having two equal sides, which is not the case, as one is an oppressive, powerful state and the other are an oppressed, stateless people. So today, we're just going to talk about the situation after the occupation of the rest of historic Palestine in the Six-Day War in 1967, highlighting the struggles of the Palestinians who have been living under brutal military occupation for over 50 years. But this is not to suggest that life before 1967 for the Palestinians was a bowl of cherries. Here's the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza Strip, occupied by Israel in 1967. According to the UN Resolution 242 in 1967 and later 338 and the international community, this is an occupied territory. Now, an occupied territory has occupied people. So those people have the right, like the Ukrainians, to resist and fight occupation. According to international law and the Fourth Geneva Convention, an occupying power has legal obligation towards the protection of the population it occupies, which Israel has continuously and systematically failed to meet. Also, Israel has no right to confiscate land or change the status of the land or transfer its own population into these occupied lands. Did Israel do that? Played by the book. Let's see. Big fat no. They built on thousands of acres in occupied territories, confiscated of course, settlements for settlers who are not indigenous to the land, exclusively reserved for Jewish Israelis. Discrimination, anyone? Was founded on discriminatory laws based on race and ethnicity, in which Palestinians and Jewish Israelis do not have the same rights. In the 21st century, there are streets in which Palestinians cannot use on their own land. Built a separation wall, yes, this wall, which basically divides the West Bank into segregated silos. In the same village, families which are 100 meters apart on either side of this apartheid wall need half a day to cross these 100 meters, and in doing so need to go through these checkpoints. Israel has a law allowing its army to arrest and interrogate children as young as 12. And in its laws, and they dare to call it the only democracy in the Middle East, has two definitions for children. An Israeli minor is anyone who didn't reach 18 years of age, while a Palestinian minor is set as 16. Yep. So, a 16-year-old child can be tried as an adult. Just recently, this journalist, a renowned Christian Palestinian American, was assassinated by the Israeli army while covering what she has been covering for the past 20 years, Israeli violations of international laws and Palestinian human rights. It seems that finally the Israelis had had enough of her telling the truth and, of course, being armed with a camera. While wearing a flak jacket with the word press written clearly on it and a helmet, she was shot right under the helmet by a sniper and died there and then. A premeditated murder. Wait, we still have more. They also kept shooting, preventing anyone from getting near her. You know, just in case she was still alive and can be saved. Eyewitnesses, there they are, for anyone who wants more verification. Still, we have more. The next day, the Israeli army attacked the mourners while carrying her coffin, until it was almost dropped, and prevented anyone from waving the Palestinian flag. And I have to point out something very important here. Sorry, Western media. This is not a clash between two parties. There was no clash there. It was an attack by a very well-equipped and trained soldiers against civilians carrying a coffin of a loved one during a funeral procession. What you don't know is that we're used to being denied justice. We are used to Israel not only denying us justice, but also avoiding responsibility and accountability. Israeli soldiers know that full well and therefore continue to commit war crimes like the assassination of Shireen Abu Akleh. In politics, the truth is hardly ever served. We all know that, and those who refuse to see that are just naive. We all have seen how the same events has two different coverages and language depending on where it happens. In Ukraine, for example, resisting occupation is seen as heroic, while in Palestine is not conveyed as heroic, to say the least. Having said that, what's happening in Palestine is more than just politics. This is not your average Joe's taxes or elections. This is children getting arrested and tortured, journalists shot by snipers, and civilians shot at crossing points for just being there. Salam, which means goodbye, but also means peace.